Tashidelek and welcome to Tibet This Week, where we bring you weekly news edition on Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Central Tibetan Administration. Let's have a look at today's headlines. Sikyong attends ICT event honoring Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi with Light of Truth Award, joins North American Tibetan Association Conference with Richard Gere. Sikyong Penpa Tsering continues his official visits in United States. Central Tibetan Administration celebrates 35th anniversary of Nobel Peace Prize conferment to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Department of Information and International Relations released a statement on international human rights violations in Tibet and China's systematic breaches of international standards. Tibetan Parliamentary Delegation concludes Tibet Advocacy in the Netherlands. Tibetan Youth Leadership and Capacity Building Workshop organized in Vienna. Central Tibetan Administration Spokesperson Tenzin Lekshay meets Tibet support groups in Vienna, advocates for youth engagement and human rights. India-Tibet Coordination Office successfully concludes Senior Journalist Outreach Program in Dharamshala. Office of Tibet Taiwan participates in a conference discussing relevance between Tibetan Buddhism and psychotherapy. On 9 December, Sikyong Penpa Tsering attended a luncheon meeting at the International Campaign for Tibet with board members including ICT Chair Richard Gere, Kausung Penpa Tsering and ICT President Tenzin Gyatso to discuss strategic advocacy for Tibet. They emphasized identifying influential advocates and innovative approaches to promoting the Tibetan cause. Later, Sikyong and Richard Gere addressed the 22nd North American Tibetan Association Conference, urging members to uphold His Holiness the Dalai Lama's legacy. The conference adopted resolutions on celebrating the Year of Compassion, advancing Tibetan advocacy, preserving cultural heritage, and supporting NATA's guidelines. Sikyong also participated in the Tibet strategy meeting at the Longworth building with Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, Representative Jim McGovern and others, focusing on Tibet's challenges and preparations for the Dalai Lama's 90th birthday. In the evening, ICT hosted the Light of Truth event at the Cannon Caucus Room, where Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi received the Light of Truth Award for her unwavering support of Tibet. The day concluded with a screening of Wisdom of Happiness, inspiring attendees with His Holiness the Dalai Lama's universal values. On Tuesday this week, Sikyong Penpa Tsering participated in a discussion on the future of Tibet in U.S. policy alongside Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, Richard Gere and U.S. Special Coordinator for Tibetan Issues, Azra Zia. Zia reiterated the U.S. administration's commitment to supporting Tibetans and called for continued efforts towards achieving meaningful autonomy and fundamental freedoms for Tibetans. At a Wilson Center meeting, Sikyong discussed Tibet's challenges with key figures, including Mark A. Green, Wilson Center President, His Eminence Ivan Duque Marquez, former President of Colombia, Representative Ileana Rose Lithinen, and Dr. Robert Dalai. He highlighted the importance of think tanks in shaping global policy on Tibet. During an ICT board meeting, Sikyong addressed His Holiness the Dalai Lama's reincarnation, reaffirming that the matters rest solely with His Holiness the Dalai Lama's private office, while Kashak is drafting guidelines for future scenarios. Later, Sikyong and Richard Gere met with Senator Jeff Merkley, a key supporter of the Resolve Tibet Act, to discuss its progress and significance for the Tibetan cause. On Wednesday, Sikyong Penpa Tsering, joined by Representative Namgyal Chutup, visited the National Endowment for Democracy (NAD) for a breakfast meeting with NAD President Damon Wilson and Senior Program Officer Pema Tulutsang. They discussed Tibet's situation and issues affecting the Tibetan diaspora, expressing gratitude for the use of NAD's conference hall during the 22nd NATA conference. Later, Sikyong gave an exclusive interview to Voice of America Tibetan on his U.S. tour and U.S. policy towards Tibet. Then he met with Freedom House Asia Programs Director Kamaran Pipes and Research Director Yaki Wang, addressing the Sinicization of Tibet and its impacts. This was followed by meeting with Paul Grove from the Senate Appropriations Committee, accompanied by Geshe Mölam and Mölam AI team. In the evening, Sikyong attended a renaming ceremony at the Rayburn House office building hosted by the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Chairman Michael McCall welcomed the new chair, Representative Brian Mast, and shared insights from a conversation with His Holiness the Dalai Lama on forgiveness and moral clarity. Sikyong concluded the day with a courtesy call on Representative Mast. On Tuesday, the Central Tibetan Administration celebrated the 35th anniversary of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's Nobel Peace Prize and the 76th International Human Rights Day at Tenzin Choling Monastery in Dharamshala. Officiating Sikyong Gere hoisted the Tibetan national flag, followed by national anthems and a Nobel Peace Prize song performed by Tipa artists. Distinguished guests included New Zealand MPs Joseph Mooney, Helen White, Ingrid Leary and Fijian MP Renee Sharma, who highlighted His Holiness the Dalai Lama's contributions to peace and human rights.
Our challenges define our strength and resilience, and through collective actions, a unified approach, we can secure our sovereign nations for peace, economic integration, secured borders and areas beyond our national jurisdiction, climate adaptation and resilience, and prosperity for all.
And so as New Zealand politicians, we know that it's really very, very important that we keep our cultural traditions going and that we make sure that we look after the need for our children to learn their culture.
We are all connected and we celebrate your culture, and we understand through the loss of some of our culture the struggle that you have. It is a great honour and a great privilege to be the first parliamentarians from our country to be here with you.
And I just want to acknowledge all of you who are here, and especially I want to acknowledge the children, because ultimately the message of peace that we're here to celebrate is a message for all of the children here and all of the children of the world, because we can't avoid having differences of opinion, but we can have peaceful ways to solve those differences. And that is the powerful message that His Holiness the Dalai Lama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for, and as important, if not more important now, than at the time when the award was conferred upon him.
Khenpo Sonam Tempel, Speaker of Tibetan Parliament in Exile, and Doma Gere, officiating Sikyong, delivered statements on behalf of the Parliament and the Kasha. Healthcare and relief workers were honoured for 25 years of service, and the Yarki 2024 musical collection was launched. After the ceremony, the New Zealand and Fijian Parliamentary Delegation participated in a press conference where they expressed solidarity with Tibet's freedom struggle and committing to raising awareness in their parliaments. The MPs clarified that their visit was a personal initiative to support human rights and the Tibetan cause. Also on Tuesday, on the 76th International Human Rights Day, Department of Information and International Relations of the Central Tibetan Administrations called attention to China's systematic human rights abuses in Tibet. Despite decades of international advocacy, Tibet faces escalating repression under Chinese rule. The statement pointed out Freedom House 2024 report that gave Tibet a global freedom score of 0, citing severe restrictions in cultural, religious and linguistic rights. Over 1 million Tibetan children have been forcibly enrolled in state-run boarding schools, erasing their linguistic heritage. Tibetan Buddhism faces intense suppression, with monks being expelled, religious attire banned and monasteries forced into ideological compliances. Freedom of expression remains criminalized, with Tibetans punished for displaying cultural identity or contacting outsiders. Cases like the arrest and the torture of activists and the demolition of the Atsok monastery for a hydropower dam spotlights China's disregard for fundamental rights. Furthermore, internationally, 21 UN member states and 13 UN experts condemned China's action during its 2024 Universal Periodic Review, while legislative measures in the US, Canada, and the EU highlighted abuses such as forced child separation and DNA collection. The DIIR urged continued global action to hold China accountable and protect Tibet's cultural identity. On 10 December, Tibetans worldwide commemorated the 35th anniversary of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's Nobel Peace Prize with events and festivities. In Belgium, Sherab Nangche Tibetan Weekend Language School and 8 organizations held an advanced event in Antwerp on 7 December. In Japan, Tibetans joined a peace march in Tokyo on 8 December alongside representatives from various nations promoting freedom and human rights. In Geneva, the Tibetan community of Switzerland and Liechtenstein organized a demonstration outside UN offices calling for human rights in Tibet. In London, the Tibetan Peace Garden celebrated its Silver Jubilee, aligning with the World Human Rights Day and emphasizing shared values of peace and compassion. On Tuesday this week, as part of Europe-Tibet Advocacy, Tibetan MPs Yishidoma and Geshelharamba Arutsiden began advocacy efforts in the Netherlands, meeting with officials from the Dutch Foreign Ministry. They were welcomed in Amsterdam by Representative Rinzi Churengengang, former ICT Europe Director Tsering Chamba, and local Tibetan leaders. The MPs briefed Amnesty International staff on Tibet's critical situation, stressing the importance of international support for human rights. They later met with Kim Peters and Mariska Majorhoff of the Dutch Foreign Ministry's China and Human Rights Desk. Marking International Human Rights Day, a joint protest at Dam Square featured speeches by the Tibetan MPs Tsering Champa and representatives from Uyghur, Hong Kong and Southern Mongolia communities, followed by demonstrations against Chinese rule. A 3-day Tibetan youth leadership and capacity building workshop was held in Vienna, Austria from 6 to 8 December, participated by 23 young Tibetans from Germany, Switzerland and Austria. Representative Chile Chuki from the Tibet Bureau, Geneva, and Additional Secretary Tenzin Lekshay of Central Tibetan Administration Spokesperson inaugurated the workshop. Addressing the attendees, Additional Secretary Tenzin Lekshay highlighted the importance of combining outreach to policymakers with grassroots public mobilization and joint advocacy campaigns. The training covered PRC policies, transnational aggression, and colonial-style boarding schools in Tibet, featuring testimony from a former Tibetan political prisoner. Participants also learned advocacy strategies and the role of social media in campaigns. This week, Additional Secretary Tenzin Lekshay and the UN Advocacy Officer Phunso Topke met with Elizabeth Zimmerman of Save Tibet and Karl of Friends of Tibet in Vienna, Austria. Additional Secretary Tenzin Lekshay expressed gratitude for their support and urged them to continue advocating for Tibet while mentoring young Tibetan children in Austria. Later, Additional Secretary addressed an International Human Rights Day program near the Chinese Embassy in Vienna, attended by around 40 participants, including over 27 young Chinese students. He emphasized Tibetan struggle under Chinese rule, advocating for peaceful protests and dialogue over violence. The event concluded participation from Tibetan and Chinese supporters, VTAG Australia, Student for Free Tibet Australia, and leaders of the Tibetan community Austria. The India-Tibet Coordination Office organized a visit to Dharamshala for 5 senior journalists from major media outlets from December 7 to 10. The delegation explored the Tibetan issue, the Central Tibetan Administration, and the lives of Tibetans in exile. The distinguished delegation members included Narendranath Mishra, political editor of Nav Bharat Times, Pradeep Tagore, editor of governance at the Times of India, Keshav Padmanabhan, principal correspondent at The Print, Chinvi Lee, correspondent for Central News Agency Taiwan, and Saman Hussain, correspondent for the Indian Express. Highlights included visits to the Tibetan Institute of Performing Arts, Upper Tibetan Children's Village, Nubulinka Institute, and the Tibet Museum. Meetings were held with the Tibetan NGOs, Central Tibetan Administration officials, and the Tibetan Parliament in Exile, where discussions centered on cultural suppression, human rights violations, and the Tibetan movement. The delegation also attended the 35th anniversary event of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's Nobel Peace Prize, gaining valuable insights into Tibetan culture and political struggles. ITCO continues its efforts to engage media in supporting Tibet's cause. The Office of Tibet in Taiwan, with support from the Kesang Mind Counseling Center, held a one-on-one half-day conference on Tibetan Buddhism and psychotherapy at the Taiwan Cultural University Auditorium on 13 November and 1st December. The conference invited Yangden Rinpoche, the Secretary of the Office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, along with Tibetan scholars in Taiwan who are proficient in Chinese, including Geshe Zilka Rinpoche, Geshe Chowang, and Geshe Chambe Chuzin. The event brought together Taiwanese mental health professionals and psychoanalytics, focusing on youth social issues and exploring approaches to addressing them. That is all the news for this week's edition of Tibet This Week. Thank you so much for watching.